My name is Chuck Forsaith. I'm the Director of Supply Chain Security for Purdue Pharmaceuticals, and I'm also the chairman of what's known as the Pharmaceutical Cargo Security Coalition. I've been asked to chair a panel today that's entitled Bringing Criminals to Justice Across Jurisdictions. This is essentially the cops and robbers panel. And we're always placed right after lunch, and there's a reason for that. To try to keep you guys going with some very interesting stories. The panel is very, very distinguished. These gentlemen are very, very good at what they do. I'm going to introduce them very briefly now, and then as we make our presentations, I'll give you a little bit more detail. Assistant United States Attorney Sam Lewis, the Deputy Criminal Chief for the Program Fraud Division. Roger Garrell, the trial attorney on the Consumer Protection Branch of the Department of Justice, and Andy Shuttleworth, the unit chief for the National IPR Coordination Center. The way we're going to do this is a little bit different than you've seen in the panel so far. Each one of us are going to come to the podium individually and make a presentation. That presentation will be supported by some slides. And then once those 4 presentations have been concluded, then what we'll do is we'll open it up to the audience for questions. What we do as the cops and the lawyers doesn't necessarily lend itself to a panel discussion amongst us up here on the stage. It would be much better to solicit questions from you. I will tell you, however, before we start that there may be some questions that we might not be able to necessarily answer based on the fact that some of these may be either active criminal investigations or investigations that haven't concluded yet. But we'll do our best to be able to answer as many of those questions as we possibly can. I'm going to open up the program, and what I'm going to talk about initially is cargo theft, or in-transit and warehouse cargo theft within a pharmaceutical supply chain. My background is I did 23 years with the New Hampshire State Police. I ran their Special Investigations Unit and their Narcotics and Investigations Unit. I then worked for the government for a very brief period of time running security at a military installation before I decided to go into the private sector and try to make some money before I retire. That's what led me to go to work for Purdue. In fact, the individual that hired me is actually in the room here today, Aaron Graham in the back. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, again, in-transit and warehousing cargo theft within a supply chain. One of the things that's unique about pharmaceutical supply chains, and it's not too terribly different than other supply chains, but just-in-time or lean approaches, contracted or outsourced manufacturing, contracted or outsourced distribution, those types of things cause a manufacturer, even a wholesaler or a retailer, to pass on those responsibilities to others within the supply chain. And when that happens, and when you pass that responsibility on to others, you don't have direct line of sight or direct touch as to what's going on. And when that happens, you don't necessarily see all of those processes within a supply chain. And that in and of itself is a vulnerability. How we got to where we are today and how we've realized that we had a problem and how we dealt with that problem came from 2 very, very distinct wake-up calls, 2 very, very distinct instances that caused us to take an inward look at the way we run security for logistics. The very first one occurred in Conover, North Carolina, back in February of 2009. In that month, a tractor-trailer load of insulin was picked up in Conover. That tractor-trailer load had a value of almost $11 million. It was turned over to a single driver. That driver left the facility where he made the pickup. He drove less than 100 miles, and he went to a stop, either a rest stop or a truck stop, got out of the vehicle, went into the building, came back out, and the vehicle was gone. For the next 3 months, that particular vehicle essentially fell off the face of the earth. No one had any idea where it was. No one had any idea where the cargo on that particular vehicle was. In April, late April of that year, an individual like you or I went to a supermarket pharmacy in Texas. He was a diabetic, and he had a prescription in his hand for insulin. He handed it over the counter to that pharmacist. The pharmacist handed to him his prescription for insulin. He went home, went to his bathroom, injected himself, and suffered a significant adverse medical event. When they looked at the lot number of that particular product, they were able to trace that back directly to that shipment. So that particular cargo theft led to that product being taken somewhere where it wasn't maintained properly, and then somehow, some way, it was reintroduced into a legitimate supply chain and was actually sold. The second incident occurred in March of 2010. This particular incident was a burglary that occurred in Enfield, Connecticut, and it was a warehouse that belonged to Eli Lilly at the time. It was a very, very cold winter night. It was March 13th in 2010, and a group of burglars hit that warehouse. They didn't go through a door. They didn't go through a window. They didn't try to force anything open. What they did was they went up on the roof. They rappelled up on that roof, and they cut a hole in the roof, and they let themselves down inside. And once they were inside, they stole approximately $80 million worth of product. They filled a 53-foot trailer, double-stacked, front to back, and then took that trailer away from Connecticut and brought it south. I don't think, personally, my personal opinion is, I don't think they knew when they left that facility that night that they had taken $80 million worth of product. And they were just as shocked as the rest of us in the industry the next day when that came out in the media. That particular burglary wasn't specific to Lilly. That was going to happen to one of us. That was going to happen to someone within the pharmaceutical industry. It just so happened it happened to Lilly. That caused us to start asking questions. Who is it that's victimizing us? Who would want to come after us? Who is it that would want to steal drugs from us? We had, back in the day, 4, 5, 6, as many as 7 years ago, back in that day, we had a picture in our mind of who it was that was trying to steal these drugs from us. And that was it. Take a look at the monitors. Hey, no, I'm not kidding. I mean, we never thought in any way, shape, or form that what was coming after us, what was trying to get to us, was some sort of an organized criminal element. But after the Lilly break, after a very similar break that occurred for GlaxoSmithKline, and after several other breaks, we came to a realization, and that realization was it was professional criminals that were targeting us. Take a look at those slides. Who are those people? Those are professional burglars. How are they dressed? They're in military fatigues and boonie hats. Those aren't the guy with the knit hat on and the crowbar over his shoulder saying, you know, I think I'm going to hit that place. These fellows knew what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew exactly what they were after at that particular time. For lack of a better phrase, who are these people? They're urban terrorists. That's how I would look at them. Urban terrorists. And they were interested in breaking into that particular facility and stealing as many drugs as they possibly could. What we've learned in the last 5 or 6 years is just that. The people that are targeting us, much like the individuals that try to counterfeit drugs or divert drugs in very large amounts, they're very sophisticated individuals. They're people that have a plan. They're people that understand the amount of money that can be made by doing this type of illicit activity. For cargo thieves, there are, professional truck drivers, professional burglars, people that understand how to knock out alarm systems. One of the individuals that was a part of the group that knocked out the GSK facility and knocked out the Eli Lilly facility was an individual that had the nickname El Gato. Anybody here speak Spanish? Aaron, what does El Gato stand for? The cat. The cat used to work for ADT. And he used that knowledge to be able to facilitate the breaks to those particular facilities. The only thing that the bad guys do not have are QA and QC people. That's obvious, because if they did, that load of insulin that was stolen in North Carolina would have been kept properly, so that when it went back out into a legitimate supply chain, it would have the same medicinal value that it was supposed to. They don't care about that. That particular load, most likely, I don't know it for a fact, but most likely went down to a warehouse in Florida and sat in either Hialeah or Miami-Dade in 100-degree temperatures until it came time that they found someone that was willing to be able to put it back into a legitimate supply chain. That warehouse loss in 2010, let me go through that a little bit with you and give you an idea of the sophistication of what went on in that particular burglary. There were two individuals, they were brothers, that were essentially involved in this particular incident, or essentially led it. Amaury Vila and Ahmed Vila. The Vila brothers had been doing this particular type of criminal enterprise for a long period of time. They weren't after just pharmaceutical warehouses. They had gone into tobacco warehouses. They had gone into electronics warehouses. They had actually done a very, very similar burglary to a computer warehousing in Florida that contained laptop computers that belonged to Navy SEALs. And they were able to penetrate that warehouse and steal those laptop computers. They've been subsequently been recovered, but that's how sophisticated these fellows were. 3 months before the actual burglary, on January 7th, 2010, Amaury Vila boarded an American Airlines flight from Miami to LaGuardia Airport. He rented a luxury Infiniti QX56 from Hertz, and then he drove to the Hyatt Regency. He just happens to be a platinum member from Hyatt Regency, surprise, on the Jersey waterfront, and he reserved it for 2 days. The next day he drove to Windsor, Connecticut, approximately 11 miles from Enfield, where he checked into another Hyatt, Summerfield Suites, again for a couple of nights. That was a scouting mission for this individual. FBI agents surmised in their arrest affidavit that late on Saturday evening, around 10:35 p.m., surveillance video, either on the Eli Lilly building itself or somewhere around it, spots a couple of individuals looking through the windows, peering through the doors, walking around the building. Later in March of that year, Amaury negotiates the lease agreements for 2 Freightliner tractors. What he's looking for is something to be able to haul a trailer, to be able to take that trailer up and conduct this burglary. He rents another QX56 in early March between a flurry of flights that he made to and from Miami and New York. On the 12th, he checks back into the Summerfield Suites in Windsor. The break-in occurs on the night of March 13th. March 13th, it wasn't snowing, but it was raining, it was heavy sleet, high winds, perfect night to pull off a burglary. Perfect night to do it. And again, these guys didn't do the traditional type of burglary where they jimmied a lock or they broke a window. They went up the wall, onto the roof, cut a hole in the roof, and let themselves down into that building. To do that, that required tools, special types of tools. When the Enfield police were called to that particular scene that morning, they found a collection of several red-handed Husky brand tools to be able to get into that building. The Husky brand is almost exclusively sold through Home Depot. And there were a number of very unique tools that were together that were left behind when these guys left. They didn't bring the tools back with them, they left them behind. So what law enforcement, the FBI and the Enfield police thought was, you know, let's take a look and see. Let's go to Home Depot and take a look and see if there's a receipt for just these tools, just this particular brand of tools, these make of tools, within the last 3, 4, 5, 6 months. What do you think they find? They find exactly those tools in exactly that number bought in Flushing, New York, 2 days before the burglary. They go back and they take a look at the video from that, and what do they see? A couple of fellas walking up to the counter, buying the tools, walking out to the parking lot. What kind of vehicle are they walking out to? An Infiniti QX56, walking right back to it. The police also found, when they were going through that particular warehouse, they found some water bottles at the Enfield site, several empty bottles scattered on the floor of the kitchen and the office areas. They were able to take DNA from those particular bottles and match that DNA to burglaries that occurred in other places in the United States. One in Illinois, and one of the pharmaceutical burglary that occurred at Glaxo in Virginia. In putting those together, they were able to put the pieces together that led them to one of the Vila brothers. The brothers were charged. There was a large roundup last spring. 22 individuals, to include the Vila brothers, were arrested. And we were hoping at that particular time that that was going to knock out the vast majority of this particular theft ring. Since that time, let me go through this. Since that time, Ahmed Vila has pled guilty. He pled guilty in July 2013 to theft and conspiracy relating to the Eli Lilly warehouse break. For that, he also pleaded guilty to an $8 million tobacco warehouse break in Illinois. He could serve as much as 25 years in prison. He's agreed to pay back $98 million in fines, or in restitution, and he could be fined up to $196 million. In 2013, just a month ago, Ahmed pled guilty to similar thefts in Virginia. That was the GSK warehouse. and a Florida warehouse, and also a Kentucky warehouse. He's going to be sentenced on December 4th. He could go to jail for 60 years in addition to all of the rest of those. Maury, his brother, has not pled guilty in relation to the warehouse burglary, but he has pled guilty to possession of those stolen drugs down in Florida. He received a sentence of 11 years, and he's appealing that sentence. How did we, as an industry, reduce the rate of disruption of our supply chains with theft? What did we do? What we came up with is, in God we trust. Everybody else, not so much. We started paying attention to who it was we were doing business. Remember all of the panel discussions that you had before. Who are you doing business with? Can you see this party? Have you gone to visit them face to face? Look at them. See what it is that they're doing. See where it is that they're doing it. That's what we started to do. We started to pay attention to things like doing risk assessments of carriers, freight forwarders, marine transit, warehousemen, 3PLs. We started paying attention to vetting everyone that touched our particular products. We made investments in technology. We started looking at things like GPS tracking, looking at things like anti-theft, tamper-evident technology for our products. We looked at anti-counterfeiting types technologies. We looked at temperature-sensitive technologies, things to aid us in the visibility, if you will, of those goods in transit. The ability to be able to see them, know where they're coming from, know where they're going, and be able to monitor that all the way through the supply chain. To give you an idea of some of the advancements in GPS technology, anybody have any idea what that device is? And that's pretty good size. That's a portable GPS tracking device. The white container that you see is the size of a car battery. The circle on the left-hand side of that is the magnet, and the rest of that is the antenna for that device. That device is only about 6 years old. That's how fast this technology has advanced. This is the size of the technology now. This is a GPS device that I can secrete inside a shipment, and it's actually smaller than this device right here. And that device now, that technology is so sophisticated that I can bury that in a shipment, and I can tell you where the shipment is. In certain instances on a highway, I can tell you whether it's in the northbound lane or the southbound lane. I can tell you how fast that shipment is moving. I can tell you whether someone opens the door to that trailer and introduces light to the inside of that trailer when it's not supposed to be. And I can tell you in certain instances, depending upon the technology, what the temperature in that trailer is as well. The use of GPS and the growth of that tracking technology has risen dramatically over time. And a lot of that has been based with the pharmaceutical industry. We were the guinea pigs, if you will, when that technology first came out and was first being used. The price point back in the beginning when I bought that device, I didn't buy the real big one, but fairly close to that, I was paying $600, $700, $800 a unit. I can get one of them now that's about this size, it's a throwaway, for about 50 bucks. There are also GPS devices that can go in next-day mailers that are almost flat. That are, again, throwaways, $25, $30 for that type of technology. But it provides the same type of tracking that that big device provided 6 years ago. Some of the other things that we did, we participated, or we encouraged participation, in federal or international supply chain security programs. U.S. Customs CTPAT program, the TSA's Certified Cargo Screening program, Europe's AEO program. The FDA is ready to come out with a secure supply chain pilot program, and a lot of pharmaceutical companies are interested in participating in that. We've built liaisons with domestic and international law enforcement agencies, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FDA, the DEA, ICE, a number of those organizations, Interpol. We are now connected with those people. Whenever there's a loss, whenever there's a large-scale pharmaceutical loss, be it a warehouse burglary, or a loss of a tractor-trailer worth of goods, the message goes out, and it goes out quick. You're going to see some statistics, I think, that will amaze you here in just a few minutes. Go through that. Some of the other things we did was we participated in educational seminars or conferences. This is the 31st seminar where I've spoken this year, since the beginning of January to now, where I'm trying as best as I can with colleagues of mine in the PCSC and in the pharma industry to get the message out to try to minimize this particular type of a disruption in a supply chain. I've spoken to law enforcement people, I've spoken to industry people, I've spoken to transportation companies, freight forwarders, things like that. We also share intelligence about cargo theft instances. The PCSC, the group that I oversee, puts out information about these types of events or intelligence about supply chain security programs every couple of days. We put out alerts to a group of individuals to notify them of these types of instances. Anytime there's a theft, we take a look at it, we open it up, we break it down, and we figure out what went wrong, and we try to defend ourselves for that. Lilly is a perfect example of that. After that burglary that Lilly suffered, Lilly went to the industry and said, open book, we're going to tell you exactly what happened to us, we're going to tell you where we failed and what needs to be done to strengthen us. And a lot of us, to include my company, went back and looked at that list and said, geez, there's a couple things on that list we don't do, that we need to do. Lilly was very, very good in sharing that intelligence with us and helping strengthen the industry as a whole. If all this sounds familiar, if all of what I'm talking about sounds familiar, it should be. There are federal programs out there, CTPAT, TSA, FDA. Those particular types of programs are based on the same types of principles. Know who it is you're doing business with. Visibility of your product through a supply chain. Being able to see it, knowing where it is, knowing who's touching it, who's handling it. Those are the most important things. The worst thing, and you saw that in one of the panels, and I'm thinking of the buying of pharmaceuticals through the internet from an internet pharmacy, is not having any idea who's filling that, who's touching it, who's doing it, how it's getting to you, where it came from. The same types of principles apply to us in logistics. The ability to follow those logistics and know exactly where your product is. This is the group I oversee. It's called the PCSC, the Pharmaceutical Cargo Security Coalition. This group would not be possible if not for the gentleman in the back of the room, Mr. Graham. He was the one that came up with the idea, gave me the ball, I ran with it. That was 6 years ago, and we're still doing it today. The meeting that we had to start this particular program was held at Pfizer 6 years ago. There were only about 30 people in the room at the time. It went very, very well. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I needed to go to the men's room. Went to the men's room, came back, and when I came back, I had been elected chairman. I have no idea how that happened, but I've been chairman ever since. It's a great group. We do two main things. We share supply chain security intelligence, and we educate those in the industry and those that support the industry with information about supply chain disruptions. Whether that includes counterfeiting, diversion, things like that, we try to get that message out to as many people as possible. And we've had some reasonable success. I'll show you here in a second. The actual membership of the organization has gone from when Aaron had it at 40 to over 2,000. And those 2,000 indicate, the slide is very small, but it's a whole group from a wide variety of companies that support the pharmaceutical industry. These are just some of the organizations: NADI, Pharma, HDMA, CHPA, PSI, NABP. Those are all organizations that have members within the PCSC. Here's an indication of how we've progressed. 2009 was a bad year. There were 47 what I would consider large-scale FTL or warehouse burglaries. And the average value in each one of those incidences of a loss was over $4 million. $4,200,000 was the average loss in 2009. Now, that's not counting last-mile courier things or small thefts. These are large-scale thefts. 2010, the number went down only by 2, but the value went down to around $2 million. And that value actually includes the somewhat skewed amount that was taken from Lilly, that $80 million that was taken from Lilly. 2011, the number went down even more to 36, and the average value was just over $500,000. So we've gone from 4.2 to $500,000. Last year, the number dropped to 30, and the average value in loss of shipment was only $168,000. This year, to this point, in the end of October, we've got just a little over 20 instances, not 30, 20. And of those 20, 15 of those were recovered almost instantaneously. almost instantaneously from theft. So there are only 5 right now that are out in the wind. And those 5, I can tell you of those 5, 2 or 3 of them are active investigations by federal authorities. So we've made some very, very significant progress in protecting these particular shipments in transit as they move around. There was also some legislation that was passed. It was probably the last bipartisan legislation that Congress passed that I can remember, back in October of last year. It was called the Safe Doses Act. And that part of that act related to the penalties for stealing pharmaceutical goods in warehousing or transit. A year and a half ago, if you stole a tractor-trailer load of hammers and you stole a tractor-trailer load of insulin, the penalty, depending upon what state you were in, but generally the penalty for both was the same. We as an industry didn't like that, and we went to Congress and we said, listen, there has to be more of a sting. There has to be more of a penalty for those that steal products that are consumable, particularly what our industry makes. Again, that legislation was backed by Senator Schumer in New York, and it passed. And it was a bipartisan bill, and there was no hesitation in its passing. The penalties now for stealing a pharmaceutical shipment in storage or transit are significant. Very, very different than to stealing anything else in transit as it stands today. My last slide is this. From my perspective, from the protection of those goods when they're in storage and transit. The way we do that is we conduct risk assessments. We assess and quantify threats. We build mitigation programs to combat those threats. We refine our strategy, and then, and that's why this is a circle, we do that all over again. This is not something that you do one time and walk away from. This is something that's a continual process. You need to pay attention to your supply chain all the time. These guys, the fellows from South Florida that broke into Lilly, that broke into GSK, that have stolen tractor trailer after tractor trailer, learn from their mistakes. When they get caught, just like what we do as an industry, where we go into a room and we sit and brainstorm what went wrong, they do the same thing. There's too much money in it for these people to ignore those types of issues. They do the same thing, they try to brainstorm, and they're coming up with ways to defeat us. One of the things that they're experimenting with now or playing with now is jamming devices for GPS technology. And I don't think it's going to be very long before they come up with something that we're going to have to combat the other way. But if I leave you with anything at all before I turn it over to Sam, if I leave you with anything at all, it's this. It's visibility. The ability to know who it is you're doing business with and see what it is that's moving. If you can't do both of those or even one of the 2 of those, you're in trouble. You're in serious trouble. Your product can be handled by people that you don't want to have handle it. Your product can go through environmental conditions that could cause it to be ineffective at the very least, toxic at the very worst. It's something that you have to pay attention to very, very closely.